Hey everyone, it's Joe Glines here, and today I'm talking with Joe Winograd out of Chicago, Illinois. Thanks for joining us today, Joe. Now, actually, Joe's attended several. I don't know if lately if I've seen you at the webinars, but I know you've attended several of the webinars in the past, right, Joe?
Yeah, I've attended several, and when I don't attend, it's only because I can't due to time obligations, and I often listen to the webinar offline. Great of you and Jackie to post those, by the way.
Yeah, well, actually, the other thing I should say, because I know you've also helped in the webinars solve some things or give input. It's always really helpful. So it's fun to have people there that have different backgrounds. Speaking of which, why don't you tell us a bit about your education and focus for work and for education and for your background and work.
Sure, happy to do that. Yeah, even though I'm in the Chicago area now, I was born and bred in the Philadelphia area, and went to a great high school there called Central High School, which I think a lot of folks will know about if you know Philly. Anyway, went on to college, and my undergraduate work was not actually in computers. It was in an area called operations research, but turns out that from my junior year on, I wound up spending virtually all of my time at our UNIVAC 1107 computer, and that was when I got involved with learning the assembly language of the 1107, as well as some higher level language. CASE was very big on ALGOL, and I mentioned CASE, that's the college, Case Institute of Technology in Cleveland. And so I learned ALGOL and Fortran as higher level languages, but did most of my work in assembly language. And did some graduate work at both Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh and the University of Pennsylvania Moore School of Electrical Engineering in Philadelphia.
No, wow.
And then when I did get out into the real world and started working at RCA, which at the time was a manufacturer of computers, and I got involved.
They tried real hard. They spent a fortune.
They spent an absolute fortune. Unfortunately, just got driven out of the business. But in any event, they were working on some really innovative solutions back then. This is like in the late 60s. And back then, we all had these big mainframe computers. And so they were what we call time-sharing systems. And RCA had developed a set of hardware that had virtual memory, one of the really early virtual memory demand paging systems. And I was fortunate enough to work on the internals of that operating system, the kernel of the operating system, all assembly language programming. So I wrote the interrupt handler for that machine. I wrote what we called the task scheduler. I hate to say that these days because people have a very wrong notion because they think of the Windows task scheduler, but I'm talking about the internal process scheduler that attempted to schedule the different tasks on the computer and time slicing, time sharing, and so on. So it was a pretty interesting, very low level techie stuff. Really loved it. I had a hand in almost all of the kernel of the operating system, the demand paging algorithms, the virtual memory management routines, and so on. And wrote a number of papers back then that were published in technical journals such as the ACM and so on. And so it was a lot of fun on that stuff. And then as my career went forward, I got involved more in IT organizations. I actually became the CIO of a Fortune 500 company, was the head, back then we called it data processing, was the head data processing guy at one of the big 8 accounting firms. So, largely technical. And then one day I decided, well, I think I can do some other stuff in this industry. And I got involved on the sales and marketing side of things in the computer industry. So that was, yeah. And I will say also that it varied from extremely large companies like the Fortune 500 to startups.
Mm-hmm.
And so quite a varied career. And now in more recent years, I run my own one-person consulting firm. And why we're here today is in recent years, have done all of my programming in AutoHotkey, and all of the programs that I do, both for myself internally as well as for my clients, both custom programs as well as more general programs, have all been done in AutoHotkey.
Cool. And approximately how long you've been using AutoHotkey?
Actually, I can tell you exactly, which is interesting because I know the date that it happened. I started using AutoHotkey on March 10th of 2011. And the reason I know that date is that, and the reason I got involved in AutoHotkey is that I had been using a different keyboard macro product,
Yeah.
and I had just done my first upgrade from XP to Windows 7. I bypassed Vista, and in going from XP to Windows 7, the keyboard macro program failed. So I contacted the guy. It was a small company, and he just couldn't get it to work. So I started searching around for a similar program, found AutoHotkey, and that the first script I wrote, must be a half a dozen lines of code, was basically to keep a program active. You know, put up a program has been idle dialog box. So I wrote, you know, a few lines of code that looked for that title bar, and then hit the enter key. And the date timestamp on that script is still March 10th of 2011. So
Cool.
yeah,
That's awesome. And I'm curious, given so you dabbled in that, right? You learned it, but then given you have such a background in programming, it's really exciting to me to hear that you actually now you at least, it sounds like all of it, but let's say it's not quite all, but all the time. But for the most part, everything you're doing is in AutoHotkey. Why is it that you use AutoHotkey over any other language?
yeah, it's been an interesting transition because before I knew AutoHotkey, obviously I did other programming, and for me, when I would do scripting back then, I don't know if you're familiar with it. This is one of those things that was in the mainframe area. I did a lot of work after RCA in the IBM space, and IBM had a system called CMS, which was part of VM 370. And one of the popular IBM products was a product called Rex. And Rex is a very powerful scripting language, and a lot of us used it in the IBM space. And it turns out that there was a PC version of Rex. So I started doing all of my scripting in that. I mean, obviously, we all write plain old batch files sometimes, but I really liked robust languages that you can do a lot in, and I guess that's my programming background coming out. And so batch files never thrilled me. You can do a fair amount in them, but for example, it doesn't have a try-catch pair, just as an example. But so I went to Rex and started doing all my programming in Rex. And then over the years, in terms of higher level languages, I kind of focused in on Pascal. So when I had to write a program, it would typically be in Pascal. And when I had to write a script, batch-like file, it would be in Rex. And then when I got involved with AutoHotkey, initially, again, it was just for macros. But then I started to notice that it could do other things. And as time went on, I said, hey, there's some really good stuff here. And then I wound up one of my programs. I've never liked these turnkey calendars. So I wrote my own, way back when, I wrote my own Pascal program that created my own calendar. Every year I would run it on January 1st and create the new template for that year. And so I decided, well, let me see if I can redo this in AutoHotkey, and I did. And I wound up liking it much better, so I ditched the Pascal version, went to AutoHotkey, and then it just rolled on from there. And then it got to a point where, I can't say exactly when, but a few years down the pike from 2011, every script I was writing was in AutoHotkey, and every program I was writing was in AutoHotkey. And then I got to the point where I was no longer working for other companies. I was just on my own, and I needed to have a facility to write programs that I could give to my clients. And so I said, well, hey, I can actually do this in AutoHotkey if I can create an executable program. And the good news with AutoHotkey is you have the compiler. So you can now, it's not, as we all know, it's not a real compiler. I mean, it just takes the AutoHotkey executable and put your source code in there. But the good news is it is an exe, and from the purpose of an installer, it looks like an executable, and it is. It's just not what we traditionally think of as compiled code. But in any event, I then found this product called the NSIS, the Nullsoft Scriptable installation system, and what it allowed you to do is to build an installer for Windows.
Yeah.
So at that point, the transition was kind of complete. I was doing everything in AutoHotkey, from my own little quickies to programs that I would do for clients, and I was creating installers with NSIS, and to this day, that's what I've been doing.
And just to clarify, because I know you wrote me on the stuff, but the installer for this is you actually write an installer for the AutoHotkey executable that you created. So an end client gets a much more robust looking, and actually, especially for those that are non-techie, a much more something they're used to getting.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. I mean, from an end user perspective, it's like installing any other piece of software. Right? It's like installing Microsoft Office or Adobe Reader or Acrobat. I mean, it's an installer. You click on it and comes, when most of us have the UAC enabled. So you run the installer and it gives you the UAC and you say, yeah, let it rip. And by the way, I have my own code signing certificate, so that,
cool.
Which I wish the AutoHotkey folks would do, because that still comes up unknown publisher. But, I got a code signing certificate initially from Symantec and now from DigiCert. But so the end user feels comfortable that it's a legitimate installer, and yeah, it looks very much like installing any other program. And sometimes it gives them choices like, do you want a desktop shortcut? For some programs, I do both 32-bit and 64-bit installers. For some, it's just a 32-bit one, which obviously, if you're not too worried about the 2 GB limit, you can do a 32-bit installer and it runs fine on both 32-bit and 64-bit Windows. But sometimes it's important to have installers for both bit levels. But yeah, I mean, it does. It looks it's like installing any other program. So the users are very comfortable with it. I always create a start menu program group, and it's got shortcuts to the program, and I build an official uninstaller. So if you want to uninstall it, you don't have to go through hoops. You just go to the programs and features, and you click the uninstall, and it does a standard Windows uninstall. So I tried to make it neat and clean like any other commercial piece of software.
Right. And I'm curious, how often, I mean, I worked in, it sounds like very similar companies. I mean, I was in Fortune 500 most of my life in corporate world. And how often does the whole thing about, hey, AutoHotkey is only a Windows-based program, does that come up very often as an issue for people?
It does sometimes. I mean, look, so much of the world, the commercial world and the corporate world, is Windows, that it's not a big issue. I haven't looked lately at the non-Windows market share, but there's certainly a big customer base out there just for Windows. Now, more recently, I am getting more issues with wanting .NET capability, and so there was one situation where I was doing a custom program for a company in Australia, and some of their customer base, actually all of their customer base was academia, so the Mac became an issue there, and so that did become a problem. And obviously their variants of Unix are popular even in the corporate world. So yeah, it's somewhat of an issue, but there's so much market space out there for Windows only client side, and that's all I do. I don't do anything on the web either. I'm not a web developer, website developer. I just do client side Windows programs, and that keeps me busy enough.
The few that I run into using a Mac, they can usually say, oh, well, I can create a virtual machine that's running Windows and run it in there if they have to, but yeah, it's super rare in corporate world where it's a thing.
Yeah, the bigger issue in the corporate world is, in terms of AutoHotkey, is not allowing any third-party software. So if you and so that's where somebody would want a solution, and this I see more often, by the way, than other platforms is somebody wants a solution that must be in something that's either built into Windows or readily available from Microsoft. So in other words, things like PowerShell or VB, VBA, plain old batch files. And so if they really needed to run AutoHotkey, for some folks, that can be a problem. Now, that's where my solution in terms of building an installer takes away the need for AutoHotkey. They just need to get permission to be able to use third-party software. And these days, very few shops run 100% Microsoft software. I mean, even things like Adobe have to be there for folks, and there are plenty of other products where nobody in their right mind would just use Notepad as their text editor. I mean, it's not robust enough, or Paint, Paint as their
or IE as a browser,
or IE as a browser. Yeah. So there's a lot of capability out there for people using third-party products. Now, there is the other side of it, is that Joe Winograd is not Microsoft or Adobe or Mozilla. And that's where my reputation in the industry, which I'm glad to say I have a good reputation in the industry. People know me. I've published a lot, and so people trust my software, and so I really haven't had any problem with that.
And that's a great segue into the next question I was going to bring up, was the whole, you're working for yourself and finding work, especially finding work with AutoHotkey, because I know a lot of people watching these videos, right? They're getting to the point where, like, hey, you know what? I have a good skill. I'd like to make some money with this, and they're like me. I used to be years ago. Was just like, okay, how do I tell people I'm ready to work, right? And it's like, it just doesn't work like that, generally speaking. You either typically work at the large company, which is what I did, and I was able to, I didn't get paid by the hour, and I was just a corporate employee, and I did scripts for my group and other groups, and so of course I still got paid, but I wasn't, an AutoHotkey programmer. But then there's the other one, is actually people, find you, and I think that was a great point you mentioned here earlier, was you not even associated to AutoHotkey, right? You were an expert in technology and have written things, and you're building your clout, and you're known for technology. And we also talked about publishing articles, right, on topics is a great way to get your name out there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, one of my goals, and I just never can find the time to do it, is to put up a website where I can sell my software. I'd love to be able to do that someday. Right now, my website is nothing more than a contact form. It's if you want to contact me, that's all it's at the website. So, but someday I really hope to put up my portfolio of products, and over time now I've developed quite a number of them. I at last count, I had probably in the neighborhood of a couple of dozen programs that I think are worthy of being published. But I don't do that now. I'm not outbound on the marketing side. People find me, and the way they find me is what you just said. Is fortunately I've established myself as an expert in certain areas. I do an awful lot in the document imaging business, and there's a product from the Nuance folks who used to be ScanSoft was the company, called Paperport, and I've established myself as I think it's fair to say, one of the leading experts in Paperport. And if you were to Google Paperport, there's a good chance that I'll appear somewhere in the first page of results, and people find me that that I'm an expert, and they'll contact me. Likewise, I participate in numerous user forums. Obviously, the AutoHotkey forum itself, but there's and in the Paperport world, I actually manage a wiki for Paperport, and I'm the owner or manager, moderator of both a Yahoo Paperport group and a Google Paperport group. So people know about me that way. And then in recent years, actually is interesting. It started at about the same time as my AutoHotkey involvement. AutoHotkey was 2011. I joined a user forum called Experts Exchange in 2010. And it was actually to get, interestingly enough, to get a question answered. I didn't know the answer to it. I went there and found my answer, but then hung around for a bit and noticed that I could help other people, and I started helping other people. And then now over time, I've done a lot more of answering questions and asking them. And so I've become pretty well known there and fortunate enough to receive the highest accolades that they offer. They have a thing that is kind of analogous to the Microsoft MVP. They call it the MVE, and the most valued expert and most valuable expert. And so I've received that a couple years running. And then last year they came up with their highest award ever, called the Fellow, the Experts Exchange Fellow. And they only nominated one person, and it was the first ever award. And I was, again, fortunate enough to receive it. So that's
awesome.
Actually, yeah, quite proud of that. And then this year they've got a new category. They've tried to categorize the experts, so you know you're dealing with somebody who is an expert. And the highest level accolade now is called a renowned expert. Not sure I'm thrilled with that name, but anyway, I was, again, delighted to have been named one of the renowned experts. So, but to your point earlier about publishing, I have, as I started answering questions, they also have a mechanism at that website for publishing articles. And I had published several before at other user groups. In fact, I mentioned that wiki, the Paperport wiki. I mean, I published probably a dozen articles there about Paperport. And then I started writing them at Experts Exchange, and I actually looked yesterday. I'm now up to having published 90 combined either articles or what they call micro tutorials. You were mentioning earlier that sometimes the video is a better way to do things than the article, and so these are supposed to be 5-minute videos, plus or minus a little bit, and I've now done a large number of them showing how to do things. And a number of them, by the way, are about AutoHotkey. So, and I've had folks contact me. You talk about getting business without doing outbound marketing. So people have found me at Experts Exchange. They found either my articles or my videos, and they write me a message and say, hey, can you do this for me? And so that's I've gotten a lot of business through that mechanism.
Cool. Yeah. And actually, so I remember earlier you mentioned you'd switched over at some point to doing some marketing. I think you mentioned something with it, right? But that's one of the things I've written a couple programs where I'm like, hey, I could sell this, but it's not as simple as like, oh, I put it on my webpage and there it is for the world to see, right? There's a lot more work after you do that in order to actually get a decent amount of people to find it, to pay for it, and license it. I mean, there's so many things you have to do, but it's possible. It's just like you got to actually. It's a fair amount of work, right?
Well, it is, it's over the last couple of years. Every time when I get the urge, I go look into ways to do this, and I've varied everywhere from putting up my own website, except I pretty much concluded I don't want to become a website developer, whether it's for other people or my own site. I just don't want to do that. I'd rather spend my time writing the code, developing the programs, than developing a website. So I started looking at turnkey solutions, things like, I don't know if you ever heard of it, there's a site called Shopify.
Oh, yeah.
And so you can put up a Shopify page, and then there's a company that concentrates exclusively in the area of digital delivery of products. And so and they even have controls on product keys and so on. So I'm looking into all that, but you're right. I mean, every time I do it, it's actually fairly daunting to come up with a complete solution that takes everything into account. And then there's all
support it, right? Once you actually launch it, it's like, man, that can be, depending on what it is, it can be possibly be a fair amount of work too.
Yeah, although that would be a good problem to have, because the only way you have a lot of support is if you sold a lot of stuff. So
agreed. Yes.
But yeah.
And actually, I just thought of something. I'm sorry to jump around, but you mentioned it earlier, and I think it's a really important point for people who want to do this kind of stuff, was, well, I don't know if it was purposeful for you or not, but you said you work mostly in like the image and something else. I forget what. You're known for a certain area, very specific area, right? It's not, you're not an automation expert, right? Where you're known as this niche area.
Well, I think there's two answers to that. One is I did become very well known in the document imaging business, and part of the reason for that is I actually worked for Oracle Corporation, the big database company, for 5 years. And while I was at Oracle, I got involved with a division of Oracle that did custom document imaging solutions, like for the patent office, for example. And so I got involved then, and this was in the early going of it, late 80s, early 90s. And then after leaving Oracle, I went to work for a small startup I was like, I think guy number 7 or 8 there. And it was a company that partnered with Oracle, but specifically in the area of document imaging. So the idea was you could be running, say, an accounts payable application, Oracle Payables, but then have an image of the invoice. Instead of dealing with the paper, you'd have an image of the invoice that the vendor sent. So, and I was with that company for 14 years, so I got really involved with document imaging. And then and for my own personal use, now this was a big time product. I mean, this is a $1 million solution for hardware and software that was geared toward big government and big industry, Fortune 500 type stuff. But for my own personal use, I started using a low-end product, that desktop type product that came bundled with the first scanner I ever bought, called Paperport. And that was when I got involved in that. And so all of my own personal document imaging was with Paperport, and I got to be very knowledgeable about that. And so that was, I say that in that area of document imaging and Paperport, I became pretty well known. But I went beyond that with a lot of the AutoHotkey work, and so a lot of my AutoHotkey work is unrelated to document imaging. Some of it is. I do a lot with PDF files. I do a lot with TIFF files. But I mentioned one of the programs I'm working on now is a program that can count the words in a Word file. It's got nothing to do with PDF or TIFF or imaging. It counts the words in a Word file and creates a spreadsheet for you that shows a count of all the words in a Word file. And I've had people who are writers, say, hey, I want to know if I'm using the word that too often, and so on.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And then there's another program I'm working on now called Tray Launch, which allows you to build a launch list of applications. It's for people that really hate the new start menu in Windows 10 or even Windows 7. And so all you do is you right click on an icon in the system tray, and it shows you a launch list of all of your favorite programs, and you click on it to launch it. So these programs obviously are unrelated to document imaging, but I've become pretty well known in the AutoHotkey community now, and all of these programs are built in AutoHotkey. So
yeah, my main point though was just, especially for someone who doesn't have the background you have, right? Is if you're trying to get work, this and that, becoming an expert in a niche is much easier than just trying to become this generic automation expert, right? Because you can show that you know this area well, and of course you got to make sure that topic is actually searched by people and people have interest in it, right? Don't become an expert in something nobody uses anymore, but it allows you to basically own that position in the mind of the consumer. And when they search a lot on it, like you just said with yours, if you search that topic, your name will often come up under Google, right?
Right.
And
right.
It's a
no,
really,
but yeah, I think that's a good point, that you can, if you become the expert in a niche, then anybody interested in that niche will find you.
Right.
Back to your comment about if it's not very heavily used. I mean, there are two sides to that. You could become one of many players in a popular niche like PDF,
yeah,
or you could be one of just a few players in a less popular niche. And I think a great example of that is TIFF. So, when you look at document imaging years ago, everything was TIFF. And then PDF basically won the battle. Like it or not, PDF won the battle in terms of documents. So these days, if you're scanning in documents, you're likely scanning into PDF.
Right.
What I found really interesting is I probably get as many hits on the TIFF stuff I've done. In fact, the most recent hit I got this week was somebody interested in a program I wrote called Merge TIFF, which will merge all the TIFF files that have a common leading characters in the file name. And so you could become, I guess it's the old, the classic big fish in a small ocean or small fish in a bigger ocean. And you can go both ways in terms of getting that kind of work.
Yeah, the saying I love is there's riches and niches, but it's the more specific you go, as long as it's not something that's dead, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's easier to stand out, and that's the biggest battle is actually getting, because in what we're talking about, we're not spending money aggressively finding people, right? They're finding us,
right?
And you need to be that. It's the whole reason why everyone fights to get on the first page of the Google search results, right? Is no one clicks to the second page. So if you're not coming up in that first page of the search, the odds of you actually getting the business they shrink drastically.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Cool. And then how do you, for your own work, I know you'd said like, you're like me, right? You're constantly, as you do stuff, writing scripts to just automate your work. You're even, I assume even writing your AutoHotkey code. I don't know if you take it that far.
Oh, yeah. I mean, barely a week goes by that I don't write a few AutoHotkey scripts, and I mean, I'll give you some interesting examples. Something popped up a little while back where I wanted to know the number of days between two dates, and you could bring up Excel and you could use its formulas and all that, and so and this is so typical of what I do. I wound up writing a quickie 50-line AutoHotkey program that puts up a nice little input box, and it defaults to today's date, but then it lets me just type in two dates, and it tells me the number of days between the dates. So, and now it's in my new trade launch program. So I right-click, bring it up, and boom, in 2 seconds I can tell the days between dates. I clone. I'm a being a systems guy from way back when, a systems programmer and operating systems. I have always been very careful about backup. So I'm really overboard on it, I have to say. But every single night I do a clone of my main. Yeah. Now, fortunately, I use software that is clever software, and it only has to write out the change tracks. So, the first time you do the clone of a terabyte drive, it's a couple of hours. But in the evenings when I run it, it's typically anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes to do a full clone. So, but the thing that's dangerous about it is that the full clone actually becomes a bootable drive. And so if something were to go wrong with the main drive, or if something were to mess up in terms of the boot order, then I could actually be booting from the wrong drive because the clones are bootable. So I wrote a quickie little script that's about 70 lines of code that looks for what drive was booted, and I check to make sure that it's the drive that it was supposed to boot from. And it puts up a message box, and it runs every time I boot. It runs, and I make the after 60 seconds, if it's good, if everything is okay, it puts up a message box that said, booted from the right drive, and it tells me the name of the drive it booted from, and it goes away after 60 seconds. If it ever boots from the wrong drive, what wasn't anticipated, it puts it up and it stays on the screen. So, it's just a great example of, of how you can use it. I've got, sometimes you want to know how long your system has been up. I wrote literally a 4-line. In fact, I'm a big believer in clarity, not brevity. I really hate it when I see these folks talking about, wanting to shave a line or two out of some code. I mean, for me, it's much more important to be able to go back, look at a chunk of code and understand it than to have, saved a line of code. So big fan of clarity, not brevity. So, but I wrote this script that tells me the uptime in days, number of days uptime of my system. And again, that's going to be in my little tray launch guy now. So with one click, I can see the uptime. And that entire script is 4 lines of code. And if I wanted not to have clarity and I wanted brevity, it could be 1 or 2 lines of code probably. It's literally a message box that reads a variable that says, how long the system has been up. So, so this kind of stuff is just, and sometimes it's bigger. I mean, sometimes, it was, and this, I didn't do this any more than maybe a few months ago. It just drove me crazy whenever I would reboot. I don't know about you, but when I start up my system, there's a whole bunch of programs that I always want running. I don't like Windows Explorer, File Explorer. I use a third-party file manager called Total Commander. And some people use Directory Opus and other managers.
I've tried both.
So, and I've got 3 screens here, 3 big screens is my environment. And I use the file manager so much, I want to copy on each of the 3 screens, some of which have different resolutions. So, and then there's an editor that I've been used, actually talk about the mainframe days. There's a popular editor in the IBM world called Xedit, and there was a PC knockoff of it called Kedit. So that's been my, go-to editor now for 20 years. And so that's always running. And I use Thunderbird for email. That's always running. And Firefox is always running. So it would take me, when I would reboot, it could take me 10 to 15 minutes to bring up all these programs, position them exactly on the screen where I run them, size each window, move it around. So I wrote a program that I called Start Manager. And basically it loads every single program, it sizes the window, it moves it to where it belongs on the 3 screens. And I smile every time I watch it. I hope when there's a desktop shortcut for it, and I click it, and boom, I've got my environment all set up. And then it occurred to me that, well, when I want to shut down, I've got to close out all those things. And this is how, one of the nice things about AutoHotkey is you keep improving your script. So initially when I did Start Man, all it could do was start the programs. Then I put in an option, a radio button that said, well, close them. And so now I can close them and it'll close every single program that's open. So it's, and that's, for me, that stuff just keeps going on and on. There's always something new to help improve and automate my environment.
Yeah, by the way, when you mentioned the date thing, it reminded me, and I was looking, I still have it in my main script, but it's commented out because I don't actually use it. I wrote it for a friend who, this is when I worked at TI, and he actually dealt with building of the actual materials, and he would have to, know like, oh, I need to reschedule this, so I need to go 14 days out or 32 days out or 74 days out. And so he'd be looking at these calendars. And so I wrote him, and it looks like it's about 8 lines, and it could be more concise. But it's still, he types in the number, and it returns back that date, for him in a second. And it was like, yeah, it's so simple. Yet he used to spend so much time trying to look up that stuff. And then, of course, worry you got it wrong, right? Whereas this is not going to differ. But I agree also on that. Also, the ease of reading and reworking later, and as opposed to saving a couple lines, when also the saving a few lines on a computer, it doesn't really change efficiency, right? I mean, it's not noticeable, like, oh, I got rid of some blank lines, or I wrote I guess ternaries are, if you're doing it millions of times, a little more efficient. But yeah, the stuff I do, none of it matters.
Well, I find so many folks, when they're writing code, will try to get so much in one line, and you have to then study that line to see what it does. And the problem is, even for the author of it, when you go back six
Right.
months later, and you have to then restudy that line and say, what in the world did I do here? And it can be so much clearer if you
Yeah.
and maybe make it into, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines where you see the assignment statements. And
Right.
the other thing, by the way, that I find it drives me crazy is people will not name their variables
Yeah.
well. And,
Yeah.
like, I mean, I can't tell you the number of people that will use X or Y or A or B. And I go in the exact opposite direction. I use long variable names that tell me exactly
Yeah.
what that variable does.
Yeah.
And sure, you have to think about where the time goes. It doesn't go in being able to type faster or being able to type less. That's not what it's all about,
Yeah.
in my opinion. So, and so I don't mind typing longer variable names. And of course, if you've got a decent editor and if you know your editor well,
Right.
then you can easily copy a line and get the complex variable name very easily to use again. So,
Or like AutoHotkey Studio, actually, it's scanning your files. So after you've typed it once, it will, when you start typing, it'll use the auto assist and bring it up for you. And that's one of the things I love about it is I don't have to remember. I gotta have an idea what it was, but I don't have to know exactly what it was.
yeah, so those are interesting products. I've looked at the Studio. I've looked at Site.
Yep.
The version for AutoHotkey,
Yep.
and I can see for people, if you like an IDE environment and if you don't have anything else, I think they're great tools. If for me, I'm so proficient in Kedit, and I've written so many macros. And by the way, I mentioned the Rex language earlier. It turns out that Kedit, being part of that whole time frame,
Mm-hmm.
took the Rex language and made a version of it called Kex for Kedit Rex and built it into the editor. So you have this
Oh, cool.
really robust scripting language inside the editor. So I've written a boatload of Kex scripts that, and so for me, there's no way that I could be more efficient with with a Site or with an AHK Studio than I am by using this Kedit tool with my own macros around it. So, but I can see for other folks that those products, those IDs would be useful.
Jackie and I's stance is we don't care what you use as long as it's not just what's it called, Notepad.
Yeah,
right? It's basically once you get past using just a default editor that doesn't offer anything, the differences are generally speaking going to be pretty small, and it's like what you're used to. Like I use Site for I'd say at least 8 years, and I still use it for other stuff. It's just an AutoHotkey I program in Studio now. But anytime I open almost anything else, I'm using Site. It's super lightweight, and it like you said, for me, I know it well. I've customized some settings to it, so it works the way I want it to, and I'm happy. Right, I have no desire at all to switch to anything else because it's Anyway, I like it.
Yep.
Cool. Awesome. Well, this has been great. Is there anything else that you want to bring up in the call?
Well, I guess one thing that I want to point out, one of the real strengths of AutoHotkey is that it allows you to leverage other command line tools. And I've written a lot of programs that do that, especially in the PDF space. So to give an example, there's a great set of command line utilities called the XPDF utilities. And they can do things like extract the text from a PDF file. They can provide the metadata information from a PDF file. And so one of the nice things that you can do, it's amazing how powerful the simple run and run wait commands are in AutoHotkey. So I don't have to build everything from scratch, which is really nice. I can leverage those, and with the installer capability, as long as I have to have the rights to distribute, and so I'm always careful to make sure that I do. And in some cases, I actually pay for that. I'll pay a fee, like a developer's fee, so I can distribute it with my programs. In other cases, you don't have to do that. You just have to provide
I did.
redistribution documentation or whatever. But so it's nice when you build an installer, I can include things like these XPDF utilities or tools like Image Magic, Graphics Magic, Earfan View. I mean, that's a great example where, Earfan View, which is a great graphic editing tool, picture editing tool, also has a command line feature that's extremely powerful. There's a tool called PDF-TK, which allows you to, which has a command line version. Obviously, most of these tools do have GUI versions, but some of them have these command line versions. So it's really great that you can call them. Now, some of them, by the way, the other side of this, so what I'm saying is that you can actually take some tools that have a GUI, but use the command line version in your own AutoHotkey program. But you can also go the other way. You can take a tool that exists only as a command line and then put an AutoHotkey GUI front end on it.
Wrapper, yeah.
So there's a great tool from a guy named Phil Harvey. It's just an amazing tool that for EXIF data in photos, but it's a command line tool. So I built a little front end on it, that where you can check boxes and stuff and decide which of the EXIF fields you want. So it's one of the things I really like about AutoHotkey is that I can write all of my own code, but I can also easily include other code in it. So.
Well, right when you said that, because I've been using FFmpeg lately for doing a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. And one was I incorporated where now I can hit a hotkey and it'll instantly start recording my desktop. But what they don't have is a way to pause, and restart it. But I'm like, so that's where I had learned a little bit about using FFmpeg for either trimming files or merging files, this and that. But it's all command line based. And so what I have is in Quick Access Pop-Up from Jean Lalonde, I have some of my frequently used syntax for FFmpeg, so I don't have to go hunt for it and remember. I'm like, here's how you join files, here's how you trim it and truncate it, whatever. But to your point, I could actually tweak it a little and turn that into a GUI and have spots where those times are, and man, it'd be really easy, right? So
nice.
I might have to work on that because it's something I don't mind the command language thing, but you're right? You can easily write in AutoHotkey a GUI to dump it to it. So maybe I'll work on that. But yeah, it's an excellent point of you can go either way. And like I'm sure you've done this. I have AutoHotkey code where I call Python within it, and vice versa, where I have Python and I use AutoHotkey for the trigger for a hotkey to launch the thing or to run. Very handy.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Anything else, Joe?
No, I think this has been great. Hopefully, it's given some people some food for thought of if they're gonna, especially if they want to start making some money doing things. It's easy to say I want to get out there, and then you try to find work. And the problem, of course, is especially on the AutoHotkey forum, right? There's so many people that do things for free. It's hard to say, well, you can get someone might answer your question, but you can pay me to do it. Of course, obviously, often it's a bigger task than just a simple thing. So you can get money for it. But it's that and the other one, which I am so not in line. I love the AutoHotkey forum overall, but they have some very interesting views on like whether you should be charging for for some things that you make. At least some people do, and I'm a big one of like, hey, I'm spending my time. I'm going to do stuff. I have no problem, and I have no problem paying people, right, that help me. But just putting yourself out there on the forum saying I want to get some work is probably not likely to actually get you any work. So
it's been an interesting thing in the industry, and I don't quite know how we got there. I guess just because so many people have provided stuff at no charge. There's some great free software out there. I mentioned earlier things like Graphics Magic, Image Magic, Earfan View. These are all freebies, and sometimes that mentality has snuck into the overall community, and so people expect things for free, and nobody would expect to get a piece of hardware for free, for example,
Right.
and yet software is much more complex, can be much more complex than hardware. But it's funny how people do expect to pay for lots of things. I mean, people who would never dream of stealing a code out of a store, let's say,
Yeah.
that wouldn't think twice about
Right.
pilfering a piece of software. So it's I don't know, it's just evolved that way. But yeah, I mean, I'll have people come to me and say, hey, can you do this, that, or the other? And I'll ask what the budget is for the project, and I'll never get a response after that.
Yeah.
not,
Yeah.
not even the courtesy of saying, "Oh, gee, I don't have a budget for this." But yeah, it's look, especially when you do custom work, if you have a more general purpose program, um, then it's funny because those are typically more difficult to write and to hit a broader audience. And yet there's some sense by folks that they think that software like that should be free.
Right.
On the other hand, if they have a very specific requirement, then it's probably they're the only person who's ever going to use this software. Then there seems to be more of a willingness to pay for it. But
yeah, and unfortunately, what is that also means the market, like you're not going to be reselling it, generally speaking, unless somewhat you can make it more generic. It's often so specific that like you got to charge more because you'll never be able to sell it, right? It's just this one person or this one company that has the need.
Well, it's that comes on, in my view, a spectrum of three levels. One is a purely custom job that really has only applicability for the person or the firm you're coding it for, and there, it's got to be a high price. I mean, you're spending all your time on this one program, and typically that can run into thousands of dollars to do a custom program like that. Then you have the issue of a program that could be generalized, but it's still a very niche market, and it's going to probably be relatively low volume. Not one. I mean, the custom is where the volume is one. Now we're talking about a low volume, and so there it's a low volume and relatively high price. So you might put a program out there for, say, several $100s.
Yep.
Then you've got the situation where it might be high volume and it could be high volume, low price. So if you really think you're going to sell a lot of something, you might put a program out there for $19 or $29 or whatever. In fact, it's interesting. You mentioned earlier competition, and I had somebody come to me for this program that I wrote that merges TIFF files, and they also said to me, well, they found another program that does a similar thing, and I was not aware of it actually, and I checked it out, and it turns out that it sells for $49.50. That's the price.
Mm-hmm.
So if I can sell enough copies of merged TIFF, if I can sell 1,000 copies of it at $49.50, I'd be okay with that. But that's, the pricing of software is always been a fascinating and far more of an art than a science. So.
Hey, I'm curious. Let me follow up on what you just said, but I have another question for you. And actually, the two are related. So sometimes people come to me and they'll say, "Hey, I'm trying to do this," and it generally does have quite a potential audience. I could see a lot of people having the need, right? And yet no tool actually out there right now is really meeting it. And so what I'll do for them is I'll say, look, you can either pay me a lot for this and it's yours, or you can pay me, and I usually keep it around a couple $100, right? $200 to $300, but you don't own it, right? You are basically helping me develop the beta, that I'm going to go try to sell later. But you guys get, you get it for cheap, and you get it sooner rather than later, and you get to actually, customize it to, unless it's crazy stuff you want in it, something that's specific somewhat to your needs, and they can help make sure it lines up with what they want. But I'll deal with that. But my question to you is, and it doesn't have to be what you do, I'm just curious in general of your thoughts on anything around this kind of stuff, is is one preferred over the other of trying to work by the hour and give a price by the hour, or to pick a job price and say this is a round, it'll be, let's say it's $1,000, whatever. Both of them have benefits and detriments.
Well, let me point out that you're really mixing two issues here. So there's the issue of how do you cost it, and I tend to prefer firm fixed price. And now, the easiest way to lose your shirt in the consulting business is when you quote a firm fixed price and you don't know what you're doing. You really need to understand, and I spend a lot of time up front. I'm willing to do that.
Or the client keeps changing. They don't know what to do.
But you have to, I tend to spend a lot of time up front, and I don't spend other money on marketing and sales stuff. So for me, I'm willing to do that. I spend time up front at no cost to understand very well the requirements. When I understand it really well, then we have it in writing what I'm doing, and I can quote a firm fixed price. It's very rare that I'll go by the hour. In some cases, I may. But those are two. So that's one issue, is what do you charge? And again, for me, nearly all the time it's firm fixed price, occasionally by the hour. But the other issue is who owns it, and that's a separate legal issue. That's an issue as to whether or not you're doing what's called, the term is work for hire. And if you're doing a work for hire, then the customer owns it. It's extremely rare that I do that. Almost everything I do is you get a license to use the software. And that's why I've been building installers, and I don't give out the source code. So my customer doesn't get the AutoHotkey source code. They get an installer, the .exe file, and the installer puts out an end user license agreement. It's a click through shrink wrap type end user license agreement where you have to click on that, and it says that you are getting a license for it, and that I own the software. So there, in some very rare cases where it's necessary, I may include the source code, but I can count that on one hand. It's nearly always that there's my customer gets a license to use, and there's an end user license agreement that drives the deal. So
cool. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it sounds like I not knowing it, but I do very similar to what you're doing. I mean, I don't do the install, don't get me wrong, but I hate. I don't want to get paid by the hour. I never want to get paid by the hour. I'd rather make sure what I do works, suits their needs, but I don't like it. It's something I feel like when I'm working by the hour, I don't know. I feel like someone's watching my back, and I want to, not have to think about that and just focus on giving them something that's going to match their needs. But yeah, anyway, the other one, but which I think you were alluding to also, was we're talking about the cost of things, but the value is greatly different, right? What is it worth to that person? Is it the other critical thing when you're deciding on a price? You got to take into account what you're going to take to make it, but think about what it's worth to them, right? That's about the pricing. That's what is really critical. And to your point earlier, what other competing tools are out there that they can switch to, right, if you don't do it?
Yeah, that's always an interesting situation. I mean, the how do you price stuff? And I've actually seen some pricing where people will say, in the first year of usage, you will give me 10% of what you save using my tool. I mean, there are different pricing models, and certainly the value delivered is one way to think about pricing. And now sometimes that's very hard to do, so we just wind up coming up with a price. But I had one situation. I wrote again a custom AutoHotkey program for a gentleman who his business model was he went to the web every day and downloaded publicly available information, but when it comes down, it's just a complete mess. And so his business model is that he cleans it up and then he sells it. In anybody who wanted to do it themselves could, except that it's difficult. So his value add is that he downloads the raw data, cleans it up, and then sells the data. But it was taking him every day. He would come in the morning, and he would go to these a number of websites, and he would have to download
Yeah.
yesterday's data, and it would take him literally hours to
Yeah.
download all that. And I wrote a program to do that for him. And, I think he said that what would have been taking him on an average of 4 hours every day took him 2 minutes with
Yeah.
no. So now
The data
what's
was
that
in better
worth?
shape, right? It was actually more reliable and consistent after you did it.
He didn't say that. I mean, I would think it would be,
Yeah.
but that, the issue was simply, can you imagine? And he hired somebody to do that. So he had somebody that he had to pay every day to
Yep.
sit there and do that. And now my program did it in literally 2 minutes. So, whatever he paid me, he was thrilled.
Yeah. So I have a company here locally that they have, last I checked, they had like, I think around, it was 8 or 10 full-time employees. They have a business where they sell stuff on Amazon, but it doesn't tie to their database. So they have these full-time, like, let's say 10 employees reading the emails come in and then entering them manually into their system. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I could automate that to where it's one person part-time, like easily.
Mm-hmm.
And they won't even let me like sit and look, and just I guess I did a bad job explaining myself, but I'm like, it's not going to be tens of thousands of dollars for me to automate this, right?
Mm-hmm.
In a half a day, maybe a day, I could write something that automates the vast majority of it, and then the one person looks at it and just eyeballs it quickly, right? And then of course, if you want to automate it entirely, that would take me longer. But it was just crazy. It was like, I'm offering for free to come in and just sit here and look at what you're doing. And like, hey, if you can give me the email, I can actually write some of the code just to demonstrate how it would work. But it was just funny. It's like some people, that's the other one, which is where I think when you put yourself out there as an expert, the people coming to you, they recognize you're an expert. They are actually trying to solve the problem. And so they almost sell themselves on you, right? It's so easy versus when you are finding work and you're saying, hey, I'll come in and I'll do this and that. And you got to convince them they even have the need in the first place, that you're the right person, that, all this stuff is so much harder. And the pricing, the profit margins are so much lower because you're convincing them. You got to give them a low price to get in the door and just a lot of stuff. I think being the expert is a great way to do better as a business.
Absolutely. No doubt about that.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I think that last little bit we had there was some great information as well. But
okay.
Thank you so much for the call.
You're welcome.
Hopefully we'll see you. I don't know if you'll be here this Tuesday. I know you still listen to them, which is awesome. I think everyone gets busy, right? We all do. That's why we record them, make them available for the webinars. And actually, so just if anyone listens to this, so Tuesdays we were going to have Jean present, but he actually had to travel, so he can't be there. So we're going to do like a follow-up and some web scraping. But when he does teach, it's going to be one on using the SQLite database with AutoHotkey. Maestrith has been doing some stuff for me. Him and I, we do a lot of work together. And he's been incorporating. Jean actually gave us a preview of it like a month ago. And it is so awesome to be able to take your data, store it in a database, and readily, add to it or use SQL to extract stuff. It's been pretty awesome. So I'm looking forward to that webinar on the SQL database because I want another deep dive. But I think a lot of people will be like, wow, that really opens up a lot of doors for using AutoHotkey, for getting your data, easily storing it, querying it, extracting it, whatever you want.
Nice. Very nice.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Joe. It was good talking to you.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.